So, Jeremy, let's talk Warhammer, shall we? Let me give you a basic introduction to what's going on here.
Yeah, thanks for... Let me start with saying thanks for coming on. I appreciate you gracing me with the plebs with your presence.
The plebs indeed. Okay, so Warhammer 40K, which is the only version at the moment, don't you mention Age of Sigmar, is a tabletop strategy game which is played with little plastic miniatures. The way the game functions is that both parties, or potentially more parties if you're playing with different rules, build their armies of little plastic miniatures, which they paint themselves, which can be somewhat labor-intensive, I admit. And they face off against each other in a set of rules. The primary set being a simple point limit. A model will cost X amount of points, and that will be dependent on how powerful the model is. And the most usual version is about 2,000 points. The armies are quite asymmetrical, so you might have an army with a lot of models for 2,000 points, and an army with very few models for 2,000 points. And these models are then organized into formations, squads, for example, that can be very small, very large, etc. And then they start killing each other. Quite simple, really, on the surface of it.
So, I know you've mentioned this before, but I want to pull it out of you. You can be... you can... One, you don't have to paint them, right? Or you can at least buy them pre-painted. Is that fair?
Unfortunately, no. Games Workshop does not offer any painted models, which is annoying.
But there are services out there that will paint them for you. Yes,
and usually they're fairly affordable.
Now, will you be made fun of if you have someone else paint your models? I feel like
not really.
Oh, okay.
It's like if you bring completely unpainted models, you'll be scoffed at. But I've never experienced any professionally painted models racism, to say it like that.
I remember when I was young, I played electric football. Do you know what that is?
I do vaguely.
Okay, so you had to paint those things, and I was terrible at it. So it's good to know that there's at least some options out there. And then, so you mentioned the 2,000 points, so that's like the size of your army. I imagine you can just pick whatever you might agree to. Like you can play 10,000, 50,000 if you have some insane thing. It's just what you both agree to ahead of time. Is that kind of like the life points? Or no, that's not the best way to describe it. But you can just pick whatever size you both agree to. There's not a set one?
Yes, there are limitations on the base rule set, which is probably, you could push it up to 4,000, but it'll start getting silly. But there are special rule sets, which allows you to literally just ignore the point cost and bring anything and everything to the board, including units that are normally banned from usual play. Like, for example, Titans, which have attacks that, it'll wipe 500, 600 points off the board in a single shooting phase.
So, are all these values, this is determined by this must be determined by Games Workshop, right? Like there's a guy, these people you're buying it's like a magic card. Like they have a certain power and a cost that's predetermined. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's all listed in the Codexes. So when two people set up to have a game, they'll pick whatever codex they want to play from and buy the models, etc., paints, etc., like so. And then you can build up quite the library and bring different armies. The armies will have different units and be specialized in different things. For example, the Space Marines are nice and tough and solid and relatively easy to play, while something like the Dark Eldar might be very powerful if you can pull it off correctly, but they can also be very, very difficult to actually play.
Are they different armies? I'm imagining them as a Magic player, like of kind of sets. Are they balanced against each other over time? Or is it kind of like, well, you really only want to play this one versus this one, or you don't want to go too far back because it's been around for a while, right?
Yeah, it very much so depends. It's been around for something like 30 years at this point. And the balance has been going up and down a lot. There are periods of good balance and there are periods of really bad balance. The most infamous one would be a certain author by the name of The Ward. He has become rather infamous in the 40k community. he wrote a new series of codexes, which are released, they used to be released far more rarely. Now it feels like almost every goddamn year they release a full new set. But he wrote a series that completely broke the balance, utterly and completely. His codexes were so hilariously overpowered compared to everything else that it was barely worth playing.
Well, you know, I can relate to that. It happens in Magic. We have emergency bannings and things get errated on the cards after they've been printed. So I think I understand that.
Yeah. Like, honestly, the game type of 40K is fairly simple. The rule book is the size of the fucking phone book, but it's not that bad. The rules are fairly simple, much simpler now with the new 8th edition, and it doesn't require that much learning. It's fairly quick to pick up. There's lots of nice guides and supplements, etc., which is really good. And it's a really interesting universe. That's my primary interest in all of it. Playing games, I used to play a lot more when I had friends actually living around me, but now that I live in the middle of the Norwegian forest, finding people to play with can often be challenging, to put it like that.
Well, especially when they're all buried in your backyard.
Yes, that as well. But I absolutely love the lore part of it, which is, of course, why I run a lore channel dedicated to it, because it is so ridiculously deep. You mentioned when we were talking about Magic that there's a fair bit of lore in Magic as well. You saw like 30 novels sitting in front of you. 30 novels is like the size of a single novel series within 40K. That's the Horus Heresy, which is now on 48, I think.
Wow. And so
the sheer amount of books is just mind-numbing.
So there must be a fair amount of people who are into Warhammer that have never played the game.
I would probably surmise so, yes, because one of the first things you have to establish when you meet a new person who plays Warhammer is what kind of player are you? Do you play? Do you collect? Do you paint? Do you read, etc.? And there seems to be a relatively even mix of them, honestly.
That's what's really intriguing to me too, because I make that connection with Magic. Like, there are people that are just into Magic lore, or people that are just into playing the game, or just into collecting. I see a lot of parallels with Warhammer for that.
I would imagine there would be, because again, there's just so goddamn much of it. Like I mentioned, the Horus Heresy series is a lore series focused around the greatest event in 40K lore, and it is now, tallied at 48 are announced, with 46 being out, and they're roughly halfway through the story.
And how is this stuff released? Is it like on digital form, or are they in actual books? How does that work?
Oh, Games Workshop have become very modern as of late, which I approve. Now they're accessible in all kinds of formats, which is really nice.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Warhammer universe?
Yes. Do you have 2-3 hours?
A little bit about the Warhammer universe.
So, it is a universe where morality is very different. It's a very non-standard universe. I'm going to compare it to Star Wars because it's one of the easiest recognizable, comparisons. Star Wars is a fairly basic story. It's good versus evil, and they throw in a little bit of controversy every now and then, basically. Like, Han Solo, for example, who did shoot first in the cafeteria, just to point that out. But mostly it's a fairly moral story. 40K is very different. There is no such thing as a good guy faction in 40K. The closest you get is probably the Tau, and they are fanatical space communists. So you really don't get anything good. The humans are a race of crazed, xenophobic to the extreme, to the point where all Xenos must be eradicated, theologically crazed Nazis. It's all shades of grey, to the point where even the unequivocally evil forces of chaos are really only a force of nature. And this is what the best part about 40K. Whenever they do something, they explain exactly what the hell it is. For example, chaos. Chaos is magic in 40K. It's what used to cast spells and rituals and all kinds of nonsense like that. Except in 40K, they have actually explained precisely how chaos works, down to how it exists, why it does what it does, how it does what it does, what it can do, what it can't do, etc. What would in most universes just be considered, it's magic. In 40K, I've got like a 500-page massive-ass book in a bookshelf behind me detailing all of that. It is an incredibly detailed universe. You don't get any of the Star Wars stuff where, the lightsaber works because it's a lightsaber. In 40K, if you want to know how a power sword works, you can Google it and you'll get an explanation on exactly how it functions. That's the part I like the best. It is incredibly internally consistent. It very rarely starts fucking around with itself, except when Games Workshop decides to head into the forest and eat some mushrooms, which does happen occasionally.
So can you tell me a little bit about the history of the game? Like, what did it start? Did it start out as a... So I went to Gen Con for the first time. If you ever cross the pond, you got to come to Gen Con with me because it's pretty mind-blowing. So I saw a lot of Warhammer stuff there, but it was kind of all over the map. Did it start out as a strategy game? Did it start out as just books? Do you know how it kind of got its roots?
It started out as Warhammer Fantasy, which is now dead because they decided they didn't sell anymore. Eventually, 40K was invented to be the sci-fi version of that, and it started out as a completely different game called Rogue Trader. And after that, it evolved into modern 40K, and it's evolved quite a lot. Like, back in the day, 40K was a very comedic game, very relaxed, almost like a satirical take on sci-fi, almost. These days, it's far more grim, dark, and serious. So,
I know we play in a role play, which people should check out. It's a lot of fun. And I think we are on episode 3 now is out, or is it just the first 2? I think 3 are out now, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So we play a role play game that's in the Warhammer universe. How big is... I mean, it's crazy to me that like Warhammer in a lot of ways is so much bigger than Magic. Because you have... I mean, Magic doesn't really have any role play that I know of. How do most people do both? Or you must like the role play because you like the lore. But do a lot of people that play the actual strategy game, do they also play these other versions of it, or is it just how the license extended over to role playing?
Yeah, it's mostly license bloom. I think there's a fairly small number of people who play that, but 40K, Warhammer, Games Workshop properties in general have just expanded in a ludicrous fashion, quite unique, in fact, compared to pretty much everything else. There's, video games, there's books, there's role-playing games, there's card games. I would actually compare it very much so to a major franchise, the way it springs out. Like, a movie franchise where you get toys, and if it gets really popular, you get all kinds of extra stuff. There's even actually a Lord of the Rings battle game that is run and operated by Games Workshop.
Huh. Interesting. So, let's talk about some of the practicality of actually getting out there and trying this game, because, from what I would like to give people is a taste of where they can go to learn about the lore, but also to give people an idea of what it costs to jump into this game, because we've talked before about the cost, and a lot of people, in my experience too, will talk about, holy crap, Games Workshop stuff is so expensive, but to me, it's not that much more than what like a competitive Magic player would play. Now, to do both, you probably need a lot of extra expendable income, or you're single, or you're living at home still, or you're young. But what is like the practical path for someone to get involved, let's say, with the lore to start?
For the lore, it's not that bad. Like, you could pick up the Horus Heresy, for example, which is a good starting point. It's, of course, a massive book series, but the individual books are decently priced. Or you could pick up one of the Codexes, which, again, the price varies a lot depending on area, etc., so I can't give you a firm one on that, but that's definitely cheaper than Magic. But for like an army, $100 to $200, probably.
And how many, just to give me an idea of, like, if I walked into a Games Workshop store, which I've only actually done once, there's one, now I'm going to do it after we have this talk, because I'm really interested to just go put my hands on these things, in a consensual way, of course. But like, if I walked into Games Workshop and I was like, hey, I want to get my first army, what are we talking about from, like, so how many options do you have?
Oh, quite a bit. It depends a little bit on what kind of, early seller boxes they have these days. The kind of quick starter guides. But, I mean, you've got Imperial Guard, Space Marines, Eldar, Dark Eldar, Tyranids, Tau, Sisters of Battle, Chaos Space Marines, of course. There's a lot of choice when it comes to what you want to start as. They'll probably point you towards the starter set, because, easy.
And is there a place, where would somebody read about the different factions? Like, I think as a Magic player, I'm thinking, like, if I walk into the store, I want to feel some connection and to whomever I'm playing, who I'm choosing. Is that in the Codex type thing, or is that, how would you find out about them?
Honestly, I'd Google it.
Yeah.
Because there is so much lore about these. So if you're interested in playing the Dark Eldar, for example, putting Dark Eldar into Google is going to give you a mind-numbingly large amount of information.
Sure. Okay. Well, you know what? Magic players never mind researching. I can tell you that much. And what's kind of nice is that if it's all out there, it's such a mature it's such a mature universe that, there's probably you could probably figure out which faction you wanted to start out with. Take a look at what kind of starter sets are out there and figure out who you want to play as, because it's not a cheap first date. I mean, like you said, a couple $100. That's not insane though. It's not that crazy. Like, it sounds like a lot up front, but I mean, if you're talking about something that's going to be your entertainment and these things don't, it's not like Magic where they're not like an exploding thing, right? Like, they last a reasonable amount of time in terms of playability, right?
Yes. They, generally speaking, don't ever disappear like that, because Games Workshop tried that, and the backlash was large.
So do people end up with just huge army collections then?
Yes, because you'll be adding stuff and adding new models, etc., all kinds of stuff. I believe the largest one I had was something along the lines of 6,000 points of Skaven, which was a lot of models. Wow. Really, the main cost, like that army probably was a few $100 at the very least. What people might be referring to, though, when they say it's super expensive, might be Forge World stuff, special stuff. Forge World has kits up to £1,240, like $1,500 for a model.
For one?
A model, yes.
And that's I assume that must be some ultra high-end handmade collectible then.
Yes, it's a large model. We're talking a Titan here, but it's still $1,500 for a fucking model.
And that's not anything to do with gameplay. That's just, I'm into the world. I want this cool sculpture.
You can play with it. You can actually play with it.
Okay, all right. Now we're talking. Now you have something to take to the old lady to try and convince her to be okay with spending this money.
The most ridiculous thing I think they have on their website at the moment is a pack that contains several of these Titans. This is actually a formation that you can use in a version of the game called Apocalypse, where you can bring all kinds of bullshit. And the pack is currently priced at £3,000.
Somebody's bought it, though, right? Somebody has.
Somebody's fucking bought it.
Yeah, you know. Wait, Arch, have you bought it?
No, I'm not that crazy, Jesus.
Well, it sounds really interesting. I think if I can reframe this at all, it'd be, if you're into Magic, regardless of for the reason that you're into it, it seems like there's a lot of the similarities in the Warhammer world where even if somebody wanted to take a break, if you're into collecting magic cards, you have an option to collect these figures or some of these sculptures. If you're into magic lore, you could pick up some Warhammer books. And you could also watch Arch's videos because he does a great job with covering the lore. And if you're into actually playing these type of games, what are some similar games? So when I talk about Magic players, most Magic players either started with Magic or they like graduated from Pokemon or like Yu-Gi-Oh. What are some games that people who play the Warhammer 40K, what are some other games that they might play now or might have played in the past?
If anything, it'd probably be video games. Because it really started very much so as a base level game. Like, it was the Pokemon back in the day.
Oh, okay.
Because there wasn't a whole lot of the games.
That's
yes,
one thing.
A ton of them.
Yeah, Warhammer has video games out there, and some of them are actually quite good. And it's an active IP for them, right? They have something out, 1 or 2 games out right now, right?
Yes, quite a lot, actually.
Total War or something like that? Is that what it's called?
Yep, Total War Warhammer.
Is Total War like a license and they just skin it with Warhammer, or is that an actual Warhammer game?
It's the Total War game with a Warhammer skin. It's probably the most correct thing.
Yeah.
If anything that the people came from originally, there used to be a small community of historical wargamers, which was different. Like, you'd have historical armies, Romans and Carthaginians and stuff like that, but it was a very, very, very small scene. Games Workshop is really the ones that have brought tabletop miniatures into the limelight, so to say.
Huh. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer because, well, I've already kept you for over 2 hours today. Is there anything that you would say to somebody who is, I mean, like, I'm legitimately in this position where I'm like, well, I play Magic, but damn, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the Warhammer community. What are some things maybe... So it sounds like this thing isn't necessarily like, hey, if you like Magic, you like Warhammer. Like, it sounds like there's a lot more going on in this community outside of just the wargaming part of it.
Yeah, I really think the core thing is the universe. Like, if you like sci-fi universes, that would be it. Because, you know, the board game aspect is cool. I like it. But it has a lot of problems with its balancing, definitely. But the universe is always there, and it's always going to be there, and it's only going to grow. So that is my opinion, the strongest point of 40K.
All right. Well, you heard it from Arch. Check out the universe. And he just so happens to have an entire channel dedicated to videos to the universe. So convenient that was his suggestion. But
convenient, indeed.
Yeah. It seems like that is, honestly, from what I can see on YouTube, the most popular thing to cover with the game. You don't see a lot of, like, I imagine watching gameplay would be like watching paint dry. Maybe I'm wrong. But, you know, I'm also one of those people that thinks watching people play Magic is really boring.
Could be, I guess. I guess it would really depend on your personal preference.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a better way to put it. Well, hopefully, if you've watched or you've listened to us here and you have some interest in Warhammer, I thought, what better way? I have access to Arch, which is, I'm very fortunate to have that, so why not bring him on to talk about the game rather than to have me stumble around and try to explain what it's all about. As you can see, the man knows a lot about the game, and we've barely scratched the surface. So, you know, if I can recommend anything, it would be to check him out, check out his channel, or dig around the lore a little bit and see what part of the universe you might like.
And thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, very welcome. Thanks, Arch. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to be notified the next time I upload a video, make sure you subscribe and click that damn bell so you actually get notified. If you want to support the cause of this channel, it survives based on the amazingly gracious support of my patrons. Link is in the description if you'd like to help out.